My father slammed the door on me at 9:30 on Christmas Eve like I wasn't his daughter, just a problem he'd finally decided to get rid of. Snow was already piling at my feet, but what stuck with me wasn't the cold. It was what he said. "You've already taken enough, Skylar." Taken what? Why was my name on a withdrawal I never made? And why did the envelope he threw at me feel heavier than paper? Inside was a bank document from our family trust with my signature authorizing a 6-figure transfer. The signature looked exactly like mine. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember something that didn't exist. 3 days later, a lawyer called my new number, the one I hadn't even given my own family. Before I tell you what he said, I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. If stories like this pull you in, you might want to stick around. I was sitting on the edge of a borrowed bed when the call came in. Unknown number. Chicago area code. For a second, I almost didn't answer. I hadn't been answering anything since Christmas Eve, not calls, not messages, not even emails from people who probably meant well, but something about the timing. 3 days after being thrown out after that envelope after everything. I picked up. "Is this Ms. Skylar Parker?" His voice was calm. Too calm. "Yes, this is Daniel Harlan. I'm calling regarding the Parker Family Trust." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the wall in front of me, the cheap artwork, the neutral tones, the kind of place you stay when your life isn't supposed to fall apart here. "You should have been notified already," he continued. "But given the circumstances, I thought it was best to reach out directly, notified about what I asked." A small pause. Measured. "There's been a significant irregularity tied to a recent withdrawal, one that was authorized under your name." My fingers tightened around the phone. "I didn't authorize anything." "I understand that's your position," he said, still controlled. "But from a legal standpoint, the documentation we have suggests otherwise." Documentation. I thought about the envelope in my bag, the one I hadn't been able to stop opening and closing, like it might explain itself if I stared long enough. "Then your documentation is wrong." Another pause. This one, slightly longer. "Ms. Parker, I'll be direct. If this matter escalates, and it likely will, you could be facing allegations of financial misconduct tied to a protected family trust. That's not something that stays internal." There it was. Not just family drama. Not just some twisted accusation my father threw at me in anger. This could become criminal. I leaned back slowly, forcing my voice to stay steady. "If you think I did this, why are you calling me instead of filing something officially?" Because he said it's always preferable to resolve these matters privately, especially when reputational damage is a concern for everyone involved. For everyone. That phrase sat wrong. "What exactly are you asking from me?" I said. "Cooperation. Access. Clarity on the transaction timeline. And ideally, a willingness to correct the record before external parties get involved. Correct the record. Like I had something to fix. I didn't take anything I repeated slower this time. "I hear you," he said. "Then I suggest you start looking at your accounts, Ms. Parker, because right now the system says you did." The call ended shortly after that. No raised voices, no threats, just facts laid out like they were already decided. I sat there for a long time after phone still in my hand. Then I reached for my laptop. The login screen for my old bank account felt familiar in a way that suddenly made me uneasy. I hadn't used it in months, not since I separated my finances completely from anything tied to my family. Different accounts, different passwords, different everything. At least that's what I thought. I entered my credentials, still worked. That alone made my stomach tighten. Then came the 2-factor authentication, A code was sent to my phone. I entered it. Access granted. For a moment, everything looked normal. Balance unchanged. No alerts. No messages flagged. Then I pulled up transaction history. And there it was. 3 days before Christmas. A transfer. 6 figures. Authorized under my name. I clicked into the details. Timestamp. Location. Authorization method. My chest went tight as I read the line twice. Security verification confirmed. Using my credentials. Using my authentication. That's not possible, I said out loud, even though no one was there to hear it. I checked the device log. There were multiple logins I didn't recognize, dates I hadn't accessed the account, locations that were close. Not across the country. Not random. Local. Close enough to be someone who knew where to try. My mind moved fast after that pattern's access points. What could be exposed? What could be reconstructed? Then something else hit me. The phone call. Daniel Harlan hadn't just known my name. He knew my new number, the one I had only given to one person. Tasha. I grabbed my phone and dialed her immediately. She picked up on the second ring. Hey. You okay? No, I said. Not even close. What happened? I stood up pacing without realizing it. Someone accessed my account. My old one. There's a transfer 6 figures and it's under my name. Verified. Authenticated. Everything. Silence on the other end. Then carefully. You're saying someone got through your security. I'm saying it looks like I did it, I said. And I didn't. Okay, she said, shifting into the tone she used when things were serious. Walk me through everything. So I did. The envelope. My dad. The accusation. The lawyer. When I mentioned the call, she cut in. Wait, he called this number? Yes. And you didn't give it to your family? No. Did you write it anywhere? Use it for anything connected to your old accounts? No. Another pause. Skylar. That's not random. I already knew that, but hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way I couldn't ignore. Someone's not just accessing your finances, she continued. They're tracking your information. I stopped pacing. Because that meant one thing. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't even just theft. It was targeted. And whoever was doing it wasn't far away. I looked back at the transaction details on my screen. The location ping again. Closer than I wanted it to be. Closer than it should have been. And suddenly, for the first time since Christmas Eve, I wasn't just confused. I was starting to understand what kind of situation I had been pulled into. Someone had built this. Carefully. Using my name. My access. My identity, and they had started long before I ever realized it. I zoomed in on the transaction record one more time. Then I saw the line I hadn't noticed before. Authorization note, pre-approved profile match. My breath caught. Because that meant whoever did this didn't just have my login. They had something deeper. Something I hadn't even considered protecting. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, but because my brain wouldn't stop building the same question from different angles. Who had enough access to make this look like me, without making a single mistake? By the time the sun came up, I had already made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for this to escalate. I was going to treat it like what it was, a structured financial fraud case. The kind I'd spent years analyzing for other people. Only this time, I was the one inside it. Downtown Chicago looked exactly the same the next morning. People rushing coffee in hand, pretending everything had a direction. I blended in easily enough. That was the one advantage I still had. No one outside my family knew anything had happened. Not yet. Angela was already in her office when I walked in. She looked up immediately. "You're back early." "I need access to one of the internal audit labs," I said. No small talk. Her expression shifted. Not surprised, just alert. "What kind of access log tracing?" "Pattern analysis, possibly external breach comparison." Angela leaned back slightly. "This about a client?" "No," I said. "It's about me." That got her attention. I didn't give her everything. Just enough. Unauthorized transaction. Identity overlap. Potential internal source. Angela didn't interrupt. She just listened, then nodded once. "You're not running this through company systems," she said carefully. "But I can give you temporary sandbox access. Off record. That's all I need. Skylar," she added, "if this turns into something legal—" "It already has." She held my gaze for a second longer, then slid her access card across the desk. "Room 3B. Use Marcus if you need technical depth." I took the card. "Thank you." Marcus was exactly where I expected him to be, half buried in screens, headphones around his neck, coffee going cold. "You look like you haven't slept," he said without looking up. "I haven't." That got his attention. "What happened?" "I need you to walk through a login pattern with me," I said, setting my laptop down. "Assume the credentials are valid. I need to know how someone could authenticate as me without triggering a flag." He turned fully now. "That's a narrow lane." "Yeah," I said. "That's why I'm here." I showed him the logs. Timestamps, locations, device fingerprints. He studied them quietly, fingers moving fast across his keyboard. "No brute force," he muttered. "No repeated attempts. No anomalies on the surface." "I know. That means whoever did this wasn't guessing." "I know." Marcus leaned back slightly. "They logged in like they belonged there." "Exactly." "Check the device signatures," I said. He zoomed in, isolating one entry. Same operating environment, same browser type, even the same patch level. "Can that be replicated?" I asked. "Yeah," he said slowly. "But not by accident. You'd have to know exactly what you're copying, or have access to it." I didn't say that part out loud. "Now check the IP clusters I added." He ran another filter. A map populated on the screen. My chest tightened. "They're local," Marcus said. "I see that. Not just local," he continued. "Consistent. Same region, same network blocks showing up over time. Which means whoever this is, they didn't just hit your account once. They've been in your ecosystem for a while. Months. Maybe longer." I felt something shift inside me. Not panic. Not fear. Clarity. This wasn't random. It was maintained. "Pull the earliest access point," I said. Marcus scrolled back through the logs further than most systems usually keep. Then he stopped. "Here," he said. I leaned in. "Date nearly 5 months ago. Access method credential-based. Device matched. No alerts triggered." "That's when it started," I said. Marcus nodded. "And it stayed clean the whole time. Whoever did this knew exactly how to stay under thresholds. Of course they did." I sat back slowly, letting everything line up. My father asking for that insurance document months ago. The scan of my signature. My old email account I hadn't checked in a while. The trust. The timing. Christmas Eve. It wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. Skylar, Marcus said carefully, "There's one more thing." "What?" He clicked into another layer of the log, something deeper, something I hadn't asked for yet. This isn't just login activity. A video file loaded on the screen, security footage, bank branch interior, grainy, slightly off angle, a person standing at the counter, hat pulled low, coat collar up, face partially turned away. I leaned closer. "Can you enhance it?" I asked. "A little." He adjusted contrast-sharpened edges. Not enough for a full identification, but enough for something else. The posture, the way the person shifted weight, the slight angle of the shoulders. I felt my stomach drop before my brain fully caught up. "I've seen that before," I said quietly. Marcus didn't respond. I didn't need him to, because I already knew where I'd seen it. At the dinner table. At family gatherings, standing in the doorway pretending not to be involved. "Run a height estimate," I said. Marcus typed quickly, "Roughly 6 foot. Give or take an inch." Ethan was 6 foot. My hands went cold. "This could still be coincidence," Marcus said carefully. "We don't have a face." "No," I said, "but we have pattern access location, and now behavior." I watched the video again. The person at the counter handed over paperwork. Confident, not rushed, not nervous, like they knew exactly what they were doing, like they had permission. That was the part that hit the hardest. Not desperation, not panic. Control. I straightened slowly. "Export everything I said." Marcus hesitated. "Skylar." "If this is family." "It is." I said. No doubt left. Not after this. He nodded once and started compiling the files. Logs, access records, video, a case. My case. But as I watched the progress bar move, something else settled in. Ethan might have been the one at the bank, but Ethan didn't build something this precise. He didn't think like this. He didn't plan 5 months ahead, which meant one thing. He wasn't the architect. He was just the one sent to the counter. I looked back at the screen one last time, at the still frame of the figure in the bank. Then I thought about my father, the timing, the accusation, the certainty in his voice when he threw me out. "You've already taken enough." Like he knew exactly what had happened. Like he had been waiting for it. My chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't asking what happened anymore. I was asking why. And I had a feeling the answer had been sitting at the head of the table my entire life. The bank didn't want to see me again. Not officially. Mr. Jonathan Feldman made that clear within the first 30 seconds of our conversation. "We've already complied with the initial request," he said, standing instead of sitting, which told me he wanted this to be brief. "Any further disclosures will require a formal legal directive." "I'm not asking for new disclosures," I said. "I'm asking you to look at something you already have." He hesitated. That was enough. I placed my laptop on the desk and turned the screen toward him. The still frame from the security footage, cleaned as much as Marcus could manage, sat frozen between us. Feldman leaned in slightly instinctively, then he straightened again. "I can't confirm identities based on I'm not asking you to confirm I cut in. I'm asking you to compare." He looked at me for a moment, measuring something. Then reluctantly he sat. "What exactly am I comparing? Gait, timing, interaction patterns," I said. "The way the individual handles documents. The way they respond to verification prompts. You have internal training on behavioral flags." He didn't deny it. Of course he didn't. Banks didn't just track numbers. They tracked behavior. Feldman exhaled slowly and turned the screen slightly toward himself. We watched the clip again. The person at the counter slid paperwork forward, steady hand, no hesitation. When the teller asked a question, the response came immediately. No checking notes. No confusion. Not first-time behavior, Feldman murmured. No, I said. Not someone guessing their way through. He replayed a segment. Pause. Rewind. Whoever this is, he said they've either done this before or they were coached. That word landed exactly where I needed it to. Coached. Now look at this, I said, pulling up the transaction logs. He scanned them slower this time. Then his eyes stopped on something. That shouldn't be there, he said. What? He tapped the screen. Dual authorization flag. I frowned. Explain. This account? This trust? It requires 2 levels of approval for transfers above a certain threshold, he said. Primary account holder and secondary authorization. My pulse picked up. I'm listed as the primary. Yes. And the secondary? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another internal panel, typed something, waited. The system loaded. Then he turned the screen toward me. Secondary authorization R. Parker. My father. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. So he had to approve it, I said. Feldman nodded once. Without that, the transaction wouldn't have gone through. I stared at the line. Not just aware. Involved. Legally. Was that always the structure, I asked? No, he said. Not originally. My eyes snapped back to him. What changed? He hesitated again, which meant the answer mattered. There was a modification to the trust authorization terms, he said carefully. A few months ago. How many months he checked? Approximately 5. Same timeline as the first unauthorized access. Who requested the change, I asked, even though I already knew. Feldman didn't say the name out loud. He didn't need to. He just turned the screen again. Request submitted by Richard Parker. Approved and processed. I leaned back slowly. Every piece was starting to settle into place, not as separate incidents, but as a sequence. Request access. Collect signature. Modify structure. Initiate transfer. Assign blame. You understand what this looks like? I said quietly. Feldman met my eyes. Yes. Say it anyway. He held my gaze for a second longer. It looks like the system was intentionally reconfigured to allow a transaction under your name, he said, with secondary approval from your father. And then he continued. That structure was used exactly once, for a high-value withdrawal. I let that sit, because that was the part no one could explain away as misunderstanding. One use. One purpose. You flagged it, I asked. It triggered an internal review, he said, but everything checked out procedurally. Both authorizations were present. Identity verification passed, because the identity had been built to pass. Who handled the in-branch transaction, I asked. Feldman's expression tightened slightly. That information is restricted. I didn't move. Jonathan, I said, using his first name deliberately now. You already know this isn't internal anymore. There's going to be a case. You're either someone who noticed early or someone who missed something that matters. A long pause. Then he turned back to his system, pulled up another record. Didn't rotate the screen this time, just read from it. Transaction was processed by teller ID 4721, junior staff. Recently transferred. Name. Another pause. Then quieter, Emily Carter. I didn't recognize it. Doesn't matter, I said. Did she report anything unusual? Feldman scrolled. No formal report, he said. But there is a note. What kind of note? He read it silently first. Then his jaw shifted slightly. Verbal confirmation deferred to secondary party, he said. I frowned. Meaning he clarified when standard verification questions were asked. The primary party, whoever was at the counter, didn't answer all of them. The secondary party stepped in. My heartbeat picked up again. Stepped in, how phone confirmation Feldman said. Call placed to secondary authorization on file. My father. Of course. And he confirmed I asked. Yes, just like that. Clean. Simple. Documented. I looked down at the screen again. Dual authorization. Secondary confirmation. System modification. 5 months of access. This wasn't just manipulation, it was design. Jonathan, I said, my voice steady now in a way it hadn't been before. If this goes to court, what you just showed me matters. I know. And you're going to have to say it out loud. Another pause. Then finally a small nod. Yes. I closed my laptop slowly, because I didn't need more data to understand what I was looking at. I had structure. I had motive forming. I had participation. What I didn't have yet was a way to prove intent beyond procedure. As I stood up to leave, Feldman added quietly, Miss Parker. I turned. There's one more thing, he said. Of course there was. The modification request. It included a justification note. My chest tightened again. What did it say? Feldman hesitated just long enough to make it worse. Then he read it. To streamline access in case of emergency, primary holder may be unavailable or uncooperative. Uncooperative? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so precise, so deliberate, so personal. I nodded once, picked up my laptop, and walked out of the office. By the time I stepped back into the cold, the picture was clearer than it had ever been. Ethan had been at the bank. That much I was almost certain of. But Ethan didn't build frameworks. He followed them. Richard Parker built frameworks. And now I knew exactly how this one worked. What I didn't know yet was how far he had planned it to go. Because if he was willing to do all of this to use my name, my identity, my career, then the question wasn't just what he had done. It was what he was still willing to do next. Tasha didn't say anything when I walked in. She just handed me a mug of coffee and waited. That was why I trusted her. She never filled silence just to make it easier. I set my laptop on the table and opened it without sitting down. He approved it, I said. Tasha leaned back slightly. Your dad. He didn't just know. He had to approve the transfer for it to go through. Her expression didn't change much, but her eyes did. Sharper. Focused. Okay, she said. Start from the top. So I did. The dual authorization, the trust modification, the timing, the 5-month window. I walked her through it like I would a case, clean, structured, no emotion where it didn't belong. By the time I finished, she let out a slow breath. This wasn't reactive, she said. This was staged. Yes. And your brother? At the bank, I said. Most likely. But he didn't design it. Your dad did. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. Tasha leaned forward, elbows on the table. So what's the next move? That was the problem. For the first time since this started, I had almost everything I needed to understand what happened, but understanding wasn't enough. Not legally, not yet. I need intent, I said, not just structure, not just access. Something that proves this wasn't a misunderstanding or a family decision. Something that shows he planned to frame you, she said. Yes. Tasha nodded slowly. Okay, then we stop looking at the transaction. I looked at her. We look at everything around it, she continued. What led up to it? What benefited from it? What changed because of it? That was exactly the shift I needed. Context. Motive. Outcome. I sat down finally and pulled up my files again. Timeline. I said. We started building it together. 5 months ago, my father asks for a scanned copy of my signature, reason given insurance documentation. At the time, it didn't raise a red flag. Families shared paperwork all the time. I didn't question it. 4 months ago, modification requests submitted to the trust. Language streamline access in case of emergency. 3 months ago, first unauthorized login to my account. No alerts triggered. 2 months ago, multiple low-level access points. No transactions yet. Testing. 1 month ago, account activity stabilizes. Then 3 days before Christmas, the transfer. And on Christmas Eve, he throws me out. Publicly. Decisively. Like the conclusion had already been written. Tasha tapped the table lightly. That's not just fraud. That's narrative control. Yes, I said quietly. He didn't just want the money moved. He wanted the story set. I was the one who took it. He was the one who responded. Family intact. Reputation preserved. Except for me. I leaned back, staring at the timeline. What changed after the transfer, Tasha asked. I opened another file. Nothing obvious, I said at first. Then I paused. Because there was something. Not in the trust. In something adjacent. I pulled up a set of documents I hadn't looked at yet, property records tied to the family. Tasha noticed the shift immediately. What is it I don't know yet? I said. But I felt it. That same pattern recognition. The kind that didn't come from logic first, but from instinct shaped by too many cases. I clicked into the most recent filings. Property reassignment. Ownership restructuring. Date 2 days after the transfer. My eyes moved slower now. Careful. Precise. Primary owner Richard Parker. Secondary beneficiary Ethan Parker. I frowned. That was always the structure, I said. Tasha tilted her head. Then what changed? I scrolled down. And there it was. A clause I had never seen before. Contingency trigger legal incapacity or criminal liability of named beneficiary. My stomach dropped. Tasha, what if I'm formally accused or charged? I said slowly, reading as I went, my position in the trust and related assets is automatically voided. Silence filled the room. And it transfers, Tasha said quietly. To Ethan I finished. We didn't speak for a few seconds after that, because this was the part that turned everything from calculated to complete. He wasn't just moving money, Tasha said finally. No, I said. He was removing you. Legally. Permanently. I closed the document. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight in a way I couldn't ignore. All those years of being the reliable one. The one who handled things. Fixed things. Didn't cause problems. And the moment I became inconvenient, I became expendable. Tasha's voice softened slightly. Skylar, I'm fine, I said. But it wasn't entirely true, because there was a difference between understanding betrayal and seeing it written into legal language. So now what, she asked. I looked back at the timeline. at the documents, at the pattern that no longer had gaps. Now I knew motive. I knew method. I knew outcome. What I didn't have yet was something that couldn't be explained away in a courtroom, something that showed intent in his own words, not just actions, not just systems, words. I need him to say it. I said. Tasha frowned. You think he will? No, I said. Not directly. Then how? I don't need a confession, I cut in. I need a statement. Something that aligns with everything else. Tasha watched me for a moment. Then slowly. You're going to confront him again. Yes. That's risky. I know. He already threw you out once. And this time I said, closing my laptop, I won't be walking in without a plan. She studied me carefully, then nodded once. Okay, she said. Then we control the environment. That was the key. Not emotion, not anger. Control. If he had built this over months, I could spend one conversation dismantling it, but only if I asked the right questions. Only if I let him believe he was still in control. I picked up my phone, scrolled through contacts I hadn't touched in days, then stopped. Richard Parker. For a second, my thumb hovered over the call button. Not hesitation, calculation. Then I pressed it. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, then clicked. He didn't say hello, just silence. Waiting, like he always did. I need to talk to you, I said. A pause. Then flat, controlled familiar. There's nothing to talk about. There is, I said. And you know it. Another pause. Longer this time. Then finally, you have 10 minutes, he said. Not an invitation. A limit. Good. That meant he thought he was still setting the rules. Tomorrow night, I said. At the house. Silence again. Then fine. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. Tasha didn't ask what he said. She already knew, because we were thinking the same thing. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a setup. And if I got it right, I wouldn't just understand what he did. I'd have exactly what I needed to prove it. Claire Donovan didn't react the way most lawyers would. She didn't interrupt. She didn't jump to conclusions. She didn't even comment right away after I finished walking her through everything from the trust modification to the contingency clause that effectively erased me the moment I became a liability. She just sat there, pen resting against her notebook, eyes steady. Then she said, "You're not being framed randomly." "I know," I replied. "You're being replaced." That word landed differently. Not attacked. Not accused. Replaced. I leaned back slightly. Legally? Yes, Claire said. And structurally. This wasn't about one transaction. It was about repositioning ownership, responsibility, and risk. She flipped a page in her notebook. "Let's separate what we know from what we can prove," she continued. I nodded. Fact. A high-value transfer occurred under your name. Yes. Fact. Your credentials were used, including 2-factor authentication. Yes. Fact. The trust required dual authorization, and your father approved the transaction. Yes. Fact. The trust was modified months prior to allow flexibility under unavailability or non-cooperation. Yes. Fact. There is a contingency clause that removes you from beneficiary status if you are implicated in financial misconduct. Yes. Claire looked up. That's a pattern. But in court, patterns don't convict people. Intent does. I need him to say something I said, not a confession, just alignment. Claire considered that. You're planning to confront him tomorrow night. She didn't ask why. She already knew. That's dangerous, she said calmly. Not physically, strategically. I'm not going in blind. I didn't think you were. She tapped her pen once, thinking. Then we prepare for 2 scenarios, she said. One where he denies everything, and one where he believes he doesn't have to. I frowned slightly. Explain. If he thinks the structure protects him, he may not feel the need to deny, she said. He may justify, rationalize, reframe. That's what I need, I said. Yes, she agreed. But you don't control what he says. You control what you ask. That was the difference. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to guide. Claire turned her notebook toward me. We need 3 things from that conversation, she said. I leaned forward. First, acknowledgement of the trust modification and why it was made. Okay. Second, his understanding of the dual authorization process, which ties him directly to the transaction. Yes. And third, she held my gaze, his reasoning for naming you as primary authorization while simultaneously building a clause that penalizes you for misconduct. I exhaled slowly. That's the contradiction, I said. That's the intent, she corrected. Silence sat between us for a moment. Then she added, you don't accuse, you don't confront. You ask, and let him fill the space. Exactly. I nodded. That part I understood. In my work, people didn't reveal themselves under pressure. They revealed themselves when they thought they were explaining something obvious. What about recording, I asked. Claire didn't hesitate. Illinois is a 2-party consent state. I know, so unless he agrees to being recorded, you can't use it. I expected that. So we don't rely on audio, she continued. We rely on consistency, meaning you already have documents, timestamps, system logs, and structural changes, she said. If his statements align with those in a way that only an involved party would know, that's usable, not as proof on its own. No, she said, but as reinforcement, as context. I leaned back again, processing. So I guide him into explaining the system he built. Yes. And then we show the system in court. Claire nodded. Now you're thinking like someone who's not just defending herself. That almost made me smile. Almost. There's one more thing, she added. What your brother? Ethan. What about him? He's the weakest point in this structure, Claire said. Not because he's guilty, because he's dependent. I knew what she meant. Ethan didn't act unless he was backed into something. He already admitted involvement, I said. Just not formally. Then he's your pressure point, she said. Not emotionally, legally. I didn't like that, but I understood it. If he realizes he's exposed, Claire continued, he may shift. Against my father. Or toward self-preservation, she corrected. Same outcome. Different motivation. I nodded slowly. Okay. Claire closed her notebook. Then here's what you do tomorrow, she said. I didn't interrupt. You go in calm. You don't raise your voice. You don't react to provocation, of course. You let him believe you're still trying to understand. I am, I said quietly. She studied me for a second, then nodded. Good. That's the only version of you he won't defend against. I stood up, gathering my things. At the door I paused. What if he says nothing useful, I asked. Claire didn't hesitate. Then we proceed with what we have, she said. Because what you have is already strong. I nodded. But as I stepped out into the hallway, I knew something she didn't. This wasn't just about what I had. It was about what he believed I didn't. That gap, that assumption was the only reason this plan had worked for him so far. And tomorrow night, I was going to stand in front of him and let him think it still did. Because if he believed he was safe, he wouldn't be careful. And if he wasn't careful, he wouldn't realize the moment he crossed the line from silence into something I could finally use. The house looked exactly the same. That was the first thing that bothered me. Same warm lights behind the windows, same wreath on the door, same quiet, controlled version of family that had always been more about appearance than reality. Nothing about it suggested what had been built inside it over the past 5 months. I stood there for a second before knocking, not hesitating, just marking the moment. Then I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Richard Parker didn't look surprised to see me. Of course he didn't. He had agreed to this. "You're late," he said, stepping aside just enough to let me in. I glanced at the clock on the wall as I walked past him. 8:01. 1 minute, I said. He didn't respond to that. He closed the door behind me with the same quiet precision I remembered from childhood. No slamming, no raised voices, everything controlled. Ethan was already in the living room. He stood when he saw me. Didn't say anything. Didn't meet my eyes for more than a second. That told me everything I needed to know. Guilt didn't look dramatic. It looked like avoidance. "Sit," my father said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. I did. No hesitation. No argument. Because Claire was right. This wasn't a confrontation. This was a conversation he thought he controlled. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Richard leaned back slightly. "You have 10 minutes, he said. Same tone as the phone. Measured, distant. Like this was a business meeting. "Good." I kept my voice even. "I want to understand why you modified the trust." A flicker. Small. Fast. But I saw it. "Because I needed flexibility," he said. "For what?" "In case something went wrong." "What kind of wrong?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then situations where access becomes complicated. I nodded slowly like I was following his logic, and naming me as primary authorization. That made things less complicated. "Yes." "How?" "Because you were already tied to the accounts," he said. It streamlined the process. Streamlined. Same language as the document. I let that sit. Then I asked, and the contingency clause. This time the pause was longer. "What about it?" he said. "The one that removes me if I'm implicated in financial misconduct." Ethan shifted slightly in his chair. I didn't look at him. I kept my focus on my father. "That's standard protection," Richard said. "For who?" "For the integrity of the trust," he replied. "Not the family, not the beneficiaries. The trust." I nodded again. "And you didn't think it was a problem," I said carefully, "to have me positioned in a way where any issue tied to the account would remove me completely." His eyes narrowed slightly. "That assumes there would be an issue," he said. I tilted my head just a fraction. "But you built a structure where one could exist." Silence. Then he leaned forward slightly. "You're overcomplicating this," he said. That was the first shift. Not denial. Dismissal. "I'm trying to understand it," I said. "Then understand this," he replied. The system worked exactly the way it was designed to. There it was. Not accidental. Designed. I didn't react. I just asked the next question. "The transfer," I said. "You approved it." "Yes." Ethan's head snapped slightly in his direction. I saw it from the corner of my eye. My father didn't. Or didn't care. Why, I asked. Because it needed to be done. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. I let a small pause form. Then I said quieter now, "You knew it would come back to me." Another pause. This one heavier. Then, "You were already connected to the account," he said. That's how these things work. These things. Not mistakes. Not misunderstandings. Processes. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not even hurt anymore. Just clarity. "So this was easier," I said, using my name. "It was efficient," he corrected. "Efficient." I nodded slowly. "And the timing," I asked. 3 days before Christmas? No answer. And throwing me out, I continued. That was part of the efficiency, too. Ethan looked up this time. Actually looked. Like he wanted to say something. But didn't. My father's expression didn't change. "You're focusing on the wrong details," he said. "Then what should I be focusing on?" I asked. He leaned back again. "On control. On framing. Outcome," he said. "Which is?" "The assets are secured," he replied. "The structure is stable, and the risk has been isolated." Isolated. I let that word hang between us. Then I asked the question Claire had told me mattered most. "And I'm the risk." He didn't hesitate. Yes. No softness. No apology. Just fact. Ethan flinched. I didn't. Because this was the moment everything aligned. Not just what he did. Why? I stood up slowly. The 10 minutes were over. Not because he said so. Because I had what I needed. "You built a system," I said quietly, "where I could be removed the moment I became inconvenient." "That's not what I said," he replied. "It's exactly what you said I said." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not guilt. Not fear. Awareness that he had gone too far. But it was already done. I picked up my bag. "You should talk to your lawyer," he said as I turned toward the door. "I already have." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "This doesn't end the way you think it does," he said. I stopped at the door, not turning around, because I didn't need to see his face to know what he believed. That the system would protect him, that the structure was enough, that I was already out. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in again just like Christmas Eve. But it felt different now, because this time, I wasn't leaving confused. I was leaving with something he didn't realize he had just given me. Not a confession, something better. Alignment. His words matched the structure. His reasoning matched the outcome. And for someone like Claire, that was exactly what turned a pattern into intent. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Inside, the house stayed warm, unchanged, controlled. But the version of the story he had built inside it was already starting to fall apart. The courtroom didn't feel dramatic. That was the part people never expected. No raised voices, no sudden revelations, just a steady rhythm of procedure documents, submitted objections, noted timelines established, but underneath it, everything mattered. I sat beside Claire, hands folded, posture neutral. Not because I wasn't tense, but because I couldn't afford to look like I was. Across the room, my father looked exactly the same as he always had. Composed, controlled, untouched. Ethan sat beside him, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed somewhere just above the table. He hadn't looked at me once. "Preliminary hearing will come to order," the judge said. And just like that, it started. Daniel Harlan stood first. "Your Honor, the matter before the court concerns an unauthorized withdrawal from a protected family trust," he began. "The documentation clearly indicates that the primary authorization was executed under the name of Ms. Skylar Parker." I didn't react, because that part was true. He continued laying out the structure: my name, the authentication, the transaction. On paper, it was clean, simple, convincing, which was exactly why it worked. Claire stood when it was our turn. "We do not dispute that Ms. Parker's name appears on the transaction," she said calmly. "We dispute the implication that this reflects her intent or participation." The judge nodded slightly. "Proceed." Claire turned just enough to gesture toward the screen behind us. "Financial systems are designed to validate credentials, not motives," she said. "In this case, the system functioned as designed. The question before the court is not whether the process occurred, but who designed the conditions under which it occurred. That was the shift, from action to structure." She began walking through the timeline. The request for Skylar's signature months prior, the modification of the trust authorization rules, the introduction of a contingency clause, removing Skylar in the event of misconduct, the pattern of account access leading up to the transaction, each point placed carefully, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. Daniel Harlan stood to object once. Speculation regarding intent, but the judge allowed the line of argument to continue. "Let's focus on verifiable elements," the judge said. Claire nodded. "Of course." She clicked to the next slide. "The dual authorization record. Any transfer of this magnitude required 2 approvals," she said, "primary and secondary." She paused just long enough. "The primary appears under my client's name. The secondary—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The document spoke for itself. "R. Parker." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Harlan," he said. Daniel adjusted his posture. "The secondary authorization confirms that the transaction was valid within the system, Your Honor." "Valid," the judge repeated. "Not necessarily uncontested." Daniel didn't respond. Claire stepped in again. "The system did not fail," she said. "It executed exactly as configured." Another pause. "And that configuration," she continued, "was modified by the secondary authorizing party, Mr. Richard Parker, months before the transaction occurred." This time Daniel didn't object, because he couldn't. It was documented. The judge made a note, then looked up. "Is there testimony regarding the execution of the transaction itself?" Claire nodded slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." The door at the side of the courtroom opened. A woman stepped in, mid-30s, professional posture, controlled expression. I recognized her immediately from the file. Emily Carter, the teller. She took the stand without hesitation. Swore in. Sat. "Miss Carter." Claire began. "Were you working at the branch on the day of the transaction in question?" "Yes." "Do you recall the interaction?" Emily paused briefly. "Yes," she said. "I do." "Why?" "Because it wasn't entirely standard. The room stayed quiet." "Can you explain that?" Claire asked. Emily nodded. "The individual at the counter presented documentation under Ms. Parker's name," she said. "Identification appeared consistent, but during the verification process there were gaps in response." "Gaps," Claire repeated. "Yes, standard security questions weren't all answered directly." "What happened then?" Emily glanced down briefly, then back up. The secondary authorization was contacted. My chest tightened slightly. Who initiated that contact? Claire asked. I did. Emily said. Per protocol. And who responded? Mr. Richard Parker. Claire let that settle. And what occurred during that call? Emily's voice remained steady. He confirmed the transaction, she said. He stated that the primary party was authorized and that the process should proceed. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Claire nodded once. Did anything about that interaction stand out to you? Another brief pause. Yes, Emily said. What the secondary party? Directed the flow of the verification. Claire tilted her head slightly. In what way? He answered questions before they were fully asked, Emily said. He seemed prepared. Prepared. The word landed exactly where it needed to. Daniel stood quickly. Objection interpretation. Sustained, the judge said. Limit to observed behavior. Claire nodded. Of course. She shifted direction. Did the transaction proceed after that call? Yes. Without further issue, yes. Claire stepped back. No further questions. Daniel approached next. His tone was controlled but sharper now. Ms. Carter, at any point did the system indicate that the transaction was invalid? No. At any point did the system reject the authorization? No. So from a procedural standpoint, everything was completed correctly? Yes. Daniel nodded, satisfied. Because that was his argument. Procedure, not intent. He returned to his seat. The judge looked between both sides, then down at his notes. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, is there additional context regarding the authorization structure? He asked. Claire didn't stand this time. She simply said, Yes, Your Honor, and slid a document forward. The trust modification request, signed, dated, submitted months before. The judge read it slowly, carefully, then looked up. Primary holder may be unavailable or uncooperative, he read aloud. The room stayed silent, because that line connected everything. Not emotionally, structurally. The judge set the document down. His expression didn't change much, but his tone did. Sufficient for preliminary consideration, he said. Not a ruling, not yet, but not neutral either. I didn't move, didn't speak, because this wasn't the moment for reaction. It was the moment where the narrative started to shift. Not fully, not decisively, but enough. Enough that the version my father had built clean, efficient, controlled, no longer stood on its own. And as the session moved toward adjournment, I realized something else. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I wasn't the one being defined by the system. He was. The main hearing didn't feel louder. It felt sharper. By then, nothing was abstract anymore. Every document had context. Every statement had weight. And every silence, especially the ones from my father, meant something. I sat in the same seat as before, but I wasn't the same person who had walked into the preliminary hearing. Back then, I was proving I didn't do something. Now I was showing why it had been done. Claire didn't open with emotion. She opened with sequence. Your Honor, she said this case is not about a single transaction. It is about a system constructed over time to produce a specific outcome. She paused just long enough for the words to settle. An outcome that required 3 conditions: access, authorization, and liability. She turned slightly toward the screen. Access was obtained through credential replication and long-term account infiltration. Next slide. Authorization was secured through a modified dual approval structure. Next, liability was assigned through pre-positioned documentation and a contingency clause. She stepped back. All three converge on one individual. Not me. She didn't have to say it. The courtroom already knew. Daniel stood slower this time. Your Honor, what opposing counsel is presenting is a narrative built on interpretation. The documented facts still show that Ms. Parker's credentials were used, her identity verified, and her authorization confirmed. The judge didn't respond immediately, because that part was still technically true. Claire nodded once like she expected it. Which is precisely why the system worked, she said. She didn't argue against his point. She absorbed it, then reframed it. The system did not fail, she continued. It executed exactly as configured by the individual who stood to benefit from its outcome. That landed harder this time, because now the benefit had been established. The contingency clause, the asset shift, the removal. Daniel's expression tightened slightly. Not frustration, adjustment. He turned toward my father briefly, then back to the judge. Intent remains unproven, he said. Claire didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for a folder I hadn't seen her use yet. That caught my attention, because I knew what we had prepared. And this wasn't it. Your Honor, she said we would like to introduce an additional piece of evidence for context. Daniel frowned. We were not informed of it as supplemental, Claire said calmly, and directly relevant to the structure already established. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. Proceed. Claire placed the document on the table, then another, and another. A sequence, email headers, metadata logs, timestamps. My chest tightened slightly, not out of fear but recognition. I had seen parts of this, not all of it. These are communications tied to the account activity over the past 5 months, Claire said. Recovered through forensic analysis of associated systems. Daniel stepped forward. Objection. Chain of custody documentation provided, Claire said, sliding a folder toward him without breaking her rhythm. The judge gestured for him to review. Claire continued. These communications do not directly instruct the transaction, she said. They do something more precise. She clicked the screen. A message appeared. From a secondary email account. Timestamp 4 months ago. Content brief. Controlled. Make sure access is clean. No alerts. The room stayed quiet. Claire didn't look at anyone. She just let it sit. Another, she said. Next message. Use her credentials. It avoids internal review. I felt something shift in the air. Not dramatic, just undeniable. Daniel's voice cut in. These messages are not directly tied. They are tied through device correlation and network mapping, Claire said, still calm, which is documented in the submission. The judge didn't interrupt. He was reading. Carefully. Claire moved to the final message. Timestamp 2 days before Christmas. After this, she won't be in a position to interfere. Silence. Heavy this time. Not procedural. Human. Claire finally looked up. Your Honor, we are not asking the court to interpret isolated actions, she said. We are asking the court to consider a sequence of decisions, communications, and structural changes that align toward a single outcome. She paused. Then, the removal of my client as both a beneficiary and a participant using her own identity as the mechanism. Daniel stood still, not objecting, not responding, because this wasn't something he could dismantle in one sentence. The judge set the documents down slowly, then looked up. "Mr. Parker," he said. My father didn't move at first. Then he straightened slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge held his gaze. "Do you wish to respond to the communications presented?" A long pause. Long enough that the room shifted slightly around it. "Then, they've been taken out of context," my father said. His voice was steady. "Controlled." But something underneath it had changed. Not confidence. Pressure. "What is the context?" the judge asked. Another pause. This one shorter. "Internal planning," he said. "Risk management." Claire didn't interrupt. She didn't need to, because that answer did exactly what we needed. It aligned. Planning, risk, structure. Not confusion, not mistake. Deliberate. The judge made a note, then another. The room stayed quiet, and in that quiet I realized something I hadn't expected to feel. Relief. Not because it was over. It wasn't. But because for the first time, I wasn't carrying the burden of explaining what happened. He was. And every word he chose, every attempt to control the narrative only made the structure clearer, cleaner, stronger. The judge finally looked up again. Proceeding to final consideration, he said, "Not a verdict, but close. Very close." I didn't look at my father. I didn't look at Ethan. I just sat there, hands still breathing steady, because whatever happened next was no longer something I had to chase. It was something the court was already seeing. The final ruling wasn't dramatic. No one stood up. No one gasped. No sudden shift in the room. The judge read it the same way everything else had been handled, measured, deliberate, grounded in what could be proven. But the impact of it was absolute. Based on the evidence presented, he began the court finds that the transaction in question was executed under conditions intentionally structured by the secondary authorizing party. He paused briefly. The use of Ms. Skylar Parker's credentials does not in this case establish intent or liability. A small breath left my chest before I could stop it. Not relief, release. The court further finds that the modification of the trust and the contingency provisions were leveraged in a manner inconsistent with their stated purpose. That was the line that mattered. Not just that I didn't do it, but that what had been done was wrong. Legally, the responsibility for the transaction and its surrounding structure is therefore reassigned to Mr. Richard Parker, the judge concluded. No emotion in his voice, just finality. Beside him, Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. My father sat exactly the same way he always did, back straight, expression controlled. But something in that stillness had changed. Not authority, not control, absence. Like the framework he had relied on had been quietly removed from under him. The hearing ended shortly after that. No confrontation, no closing words between us. Just people standing, gathering papers, leaving the room in the same orderly way they had entered it. Claire touched my arm lightly. "It's done," I nodded, because there wasn't anything else to say in that moment. Outside, the air felt different, not lighter, just clearer, like everything had finally settled into its correct place. Tasha was waiting near the steps. She didn't ask anything when she saw me. She just looked at my face, then nodded once. "That's enough," she said. "Yes," I replied. It was. Not victory. Not revenge. Just enough. A few weeks later, the formal updates came through. The trust was restructured again, this time under court supervision. Transparent, documented, balanced. My name was restored, but the control structure was different now. No single point of authority, no hidden clauses, no quiet mechanisms waiting to be triggered. Ethan accepted a negotiated outcome. Reduced liability in exchange for cooperation. I didn't attend that meeting. I didn't need to. As for my father, there were consequences. Financial, legal, reputational. The kind that don't make headlines but follow you quietly into every room after. He reached out once. A message. Short. I did what I thought was necessary. I read it once, then closed it. Because that was the thing about everything that had happened. He wasn't confused. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't even reckless. He was consistent, and that made the decision easier. I didn't respond. I didn't block him either. I just didn't reopen the door. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, out of clarity. Months later, my life looked different. Not dramatically, but structurally. A new apartment, new accounts, new boundaries that didn't require explanation. At work, things stabilized faster than I expected. Angela never asked for details. Marcus never mentioned the case again. They didn't need to. They knew enough. And they respected the rest. One evening, I sat by the window with my laptop open, not working, just reviewing old files I hadn't touched since everything ended. The timeline, the logs, the documents. I scrolled through them slowly, not looking for anything new, just recognizing how it all fit together now. Then I closed the folder. For good. Because I didn't need it anymore. The system that had been built around me, the one that had tried to define me, was gone. Not because I broke it emotionally, but because I understood it, mapped it, and then let the truth speak through it. I picked up my phone, glanced at the time, and set it back down. Quiet. Normal. Mine. And for the first time since that night on Christmas Eve, that was enough. What stayed with me after everything wasn't the betrayal. It was how easy it had been to confuse control with care. For a long time, I thought loyalty meant staying close even when something felt wrong. Even when the structure didn't make sense. Even when I was the one being quietly positioned into a corner I didn't see yet. But boundaries aren't punishment. They're clarity. They're the difference between understanding someone and allowing them continued access to your life. I don't hate my father. I don't even spend time trying to explain what he did anymore. Because the truth is, some people don't need to be understood to be held accountable. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't always come with reconciliation. Sometimes it just means you stop carrying what was never yours to hold. If you've ever been put in a position where your role in a family felt designed instead of natural, I'd really want to hear your story, and where you're watching, from what time it is for you right now. And if this kind of story speaks to you, quiet, real, a little uncomfortable but honest, you can stay with me here. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.